over 20 years of untreated, undiagnosed schizophrenia, of which 10 years were spent homelessly roaming around the country. There are hallucinations, there is paranoia, there's suspicion.
Today on Stories Seldom Told, we're joined by Neha Kirpal, a social entrepreneur who spent over 2 decades working across the creative and healthcare sectors. Neha first made her mark by founding and running India's first international art fair, before making a very big shift about 6 years ago, and this time into the world of mental health. Her mission? To help build a mental health ecosystem for India and turn pain into purpose. And that mission, as I already know, is deeply personal, as Neha has been a lifelong caregiver to a parent living with schizophrenia, and she's also a sibling suicide loss survivor. In just a few years, Neha has co-founded Amaha, now India's largest mental health service, as well as the India Mental Health Alliance. She brings together her entrepreneurial skills and her lived experience to make mental health not just mainstream, but in her words, main stage. Just recently, she released her first book, Homecoming: Mental Health Journeys of Resilience, Healing, and Wholeness. It brings together 11 incredible women leaders, each sharing powerful personal stories of navigating mental illness, recovery, and finding wholeness. If that's not enough, Neha is also an Aspen Fellow, an Eisenhower Fellow, a young global leader with the World Economic Forum, and a recipient, for those in India will know this, of the Nari Shakti Award, which was presented by the President of India. So Neha joins us today wearing all her hats: single mom, caregiver, entrepreneur, author, speaker, and lived experience ambassador. And she's going to talk about what it really means to lead with empathy, resilience, and purpose. I am so excited to have you here on our show. Thank you for joining us, Neha.
Thank you so much, Smita. Such a pleasure.
So, the introduction has said so much already about you. And I know the listeners and I are saying, we need to know more. We need to know more about Neha Kirpal.
Well, that's a really open-ended question, and I think, like all of us, our entire life contexts inform every moment of how we show up in the world, but also what we carry in our inner world. So I think maybe I'll just start by saying that a large part of who I am and how I am approaching my work has really come from a lot of the lived experiences around severe childhood trauma and mental health challenges, but then also looking at how care is built and where support comes from and the role of communities. And so I think for me, really, what's most precious is holding space for that continuous internal reflection and being able to be brutally authentic and honest, sometimes at the cost of one's own older versions, so that one can grow into what we aspire to be, which is just sort of carry light and be free in the world to embrace it. So I think my journey has been one of a lot of pain and difficulties. I've had 2 generations of mental health challenges in the family, and it made me run away from a lot of things and run into a lot of storms. And having done that for 20 years and spent a bit of downtime in the art world, I then decided that it was time to I suppose I felt ready enough and to sort of having grieved and healed from some of the past to really present myself in this context. And so, yeah, now for me, life is it's about embracing all of that, but it's also about then saying what purposefully can be built and yeah, how can we make every moment more meaningful? So
So,
I suppose that's a little
which
bit about.
that's a little bit about you, and of course, I'm going to dive deeper in a minute. But you said a very profound sentence when you were talking about yourself and the idea of about you and then the other you. And I'm paraphrasing because, of course, you said it far better than the way I've just said it. But the idea of perhaps annoying a different part of you and seeking something else. What does that mean to you? What does that even look like?
We carry all our ages within us, and as we as we sort of process that and internalize that, there is some grieving to do, there is some growing to do, and then we sort of move on. But I think to me, even today, I find myself sometimes responding, sometimes reacting, sometimes coming from a place that may not be from my present moment, but somewhere way into my past. And so I think it's this process of just recognizing that we are. This is a continuous process of being, and at every age we carry all our ages within us, which includes all our habits, our behaviors. So, for example, if we have developed a fight, flight, or a freeze response to difficulties, we carry that, and there are repercussions of that on our relationships, on our choices,
Can you
on the
give
way
us
we
a
show up in
can you
the
give us
world.
an example of that specifically in relation to you?
Yeah, I mean, my context is that when I was about 5, my mother started showing severe paranoia and symptoms of schizophrenia, except in the 1980s, nobody knew what that was. And so it ended up being, 10 years of a lot of upheaval for the whole family. My younger brother and my mother actually disappeared for a period of 10 years. We looked for them across the country. And so the illness really drove them away. And so I actually spent that entire period, obviously, as a 10, 15-year-old child, very confused, very angry with the world, and with my parents, and with God, I suppose. And so my strategy as a child became to cope with sport. So I just threw myself at sport. I played hockey national level. I played badminton. I played table tennis for downtime. Literally, I just, running away from my problems saved my life. And that was a response as a child when you don't have the faculty, the resources, and the ability to actually navigate things that are so complex in the adult world and even for adults. When you feel that you are parenting your parents, or when you feel that you are having to take on much more than what you're capable, you might have a response like that. Now, at some point in life, we have to recognize that what is familiar may not be what is healthier for us. And we have to actually, not just let go of some of the difficulties, but we have to let go of our responses internally to those difficulties. And maybe it's a reparenting phase that one needs to be in. And
Let,
so, having
let's
done
just
some inner child work, that's sort of where I'm coming from, is to revisit how you want to live and how you want to parent yourself, really.
I mean it's and I'm really appreciative of what you're saying, but I think for both the listeners and myself to understand a little bit more, because you've just touched briefly of from you, Neha Kirpal, age 5 to 15, where first mother's diagnosis of schizophrenia, and then she's actually not present. Now, most young children, age 5, 6, 7, 11, the first time you got your period, all these moments in your life as a little girl, you would hope that you have a mother. And you did not have a mother. You had a father and you had a younger brother. So you were the firstborn child, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. In
And
fact, my
so,
younger brother actually went away with my mother, so they were both away for 10 years.
right. So it was father and daughter. And you, were you at this point parenting your father as well without you realizing it?
I absolutely realized it, and it did mean sort of growing up in a world feeling like no one's setting the rules and no one's putting curfew time. But also, I mean, my father had his own coping mechanisms with all the trauma, and as someone who was trying his best, but obviously in very difficult circumstances, found himself very alone and often in distress. And so, yeah, one had to sort of broker peace between the parents, but also then, these things have a way of getting complicated in terms of neighbors, in terms of schools, workplaces, often the police and other law, the court cases, all of these things sort of happen as a result of some of these crises. Now, how to navigate all of that as a young child was, I mean, nobody is prepared for that, and it was absolutely devastating. So I don't even think I had time to process or grieve any of it. I remember when I was on a plane in 2005 on my way to do my master's in the UK. is the first time I walked into the bathroom of the airplane. And it's the first time that I looked into the mirror and I started crying and I said, I'm now free to cry my heart out because I don't have to protect anyone. I don't have to pretend for anyone. And I don't have to deal with anybody else's messes in this moment. And so yeah, the UK for me was a time of a lot of healing and a lot of grieving. But really, then spring came and life started finding its way back in me.
But that was also, I mean, it was a wonderful break from real life for you, because you were literally in another continent. I can visualize you walking into that tiny little cubbyhole of a toilet on an airplane and shutting the door, and tears of freedom, tears of empowering yourself, tears of actually me, myself, and I. And that would have been extremely powerful. Knowing full well while you were crying that at some point you're going to have to go back and face the world that you've left, because unless you choose not to, but you didn't, you chose to come back. You chose to come back and embrace the family again. But if you don't mind, Neha, can we just stick with this idea of being a caregiver for your mum has schizophrenia? Because I am sure there are many listeners who are caregivers of parents, perhaps not with schizophrenia, but who are caregivers of their mother or their father. It could just be very serious old age, but it's still full-time, round-the-clock care. And
Yeah.
so, can we understand a little bit more when you've got mental health issues as well? So, firstly, a lot of us would make assumptions, but very simply, what are the manifestations of somebody who has schizophrenia? Because we think we know, but we would like to know from your experience.
Yeah, sure. So there are some things in common, but there are very unique patterns to each one depending on their genetics, but they're also their family circumstances. Oftentimes, it is some adverse childhood or life events that might trigger a challenge. But typically, I mean, I think things around suspicion, around paranoia, around a difference in lifestyle, eating, sleeping patterns, a sense of suspicion, often with the loved ones. Some of those things, it's almost an altered perception of the world, or having a different view, really. So in my case, for example, it started off with just the parents, what looked like marital discord between the parents, and which became disproportionate and completely out of control. And then some aspects of that were picked up by my mother, and then when the illness kicked in, it sort of built on that, and it went off to saying, there's a conspiracy theory, and I don't know if people have watched The Beautiful Mind, but there are hallucinations, there is paranoia, there's suspicion, there are delusions, and then it shows up in different ways. Some people hear things, some people see things, some people believe things, even if they don't hear or see. And it's not always easy to catch, because you can actually be a great genius and perfectly lucid while at the same time being very, very compromised with the illness. So in our case, it took us over 20 years of untreated, undiagnosed schizophrenia, of which 10 years were spent homelessly roaming around the country before we found my mother and started her treatment. It took us 4 or 5 years, multiple hospital admissions to stabilize, and finally finding the drug combination that worked for her. Together with that, it was also coming back into the home, back in the family, back in the community, and finding a sense of dignity and a connection as yourself, and not becoming the illness, but being the person, and the illness being what needs to be treated. So, I mean, with a lot of joy, I'd love to share that my mother, we're three generations of women in this home here in Mumbai since we moved. My daughter, who's 13, and my mother and myself live together with our dog Goldie. And my
Also
mother,
female?
also female, yeah, and surrounded by women helpers who have all had very difficult marriages and are all single women, all self-earning members who are raising children in the world. And so that's our life now. And it's wonderful to see her make this complete recovery. Of course, we know that there's always damage in this, and there are so many lost years, so many memories. She missed having me around, I missed having her around. But more than any of that is the complete loss and absence of my younger brother, passed away a few years ago. And so, in that sense, there's often a very, very big price to pay for not catching these illnesses in time. And children are often the collateral damage when adults suffer and we don't know what to do with it. So, yeah, it's better caught in time than not. Is always the thing. And I would say that schizophrenia is one of those things that looks really scary and looks completely out of the ordinary, and it almost feels hopeless, like there's no comeback once somebody is so off in various aspects of their behavior, their words, and their actions. But here we are, I mean, my mother's been stable for so many years, and there are so many people like that who I know. Some are in the book with severe mental illness and talking about how their lives have turned around and families have come together. So there is hope in the world. As long as there's life,
I
there's
mean,
hope.
couple of things I just wanted to react to. One was the wonderful role model that your daughter has, role models that your daughter has in the home that she's growing up in, surrounded not just by her mother and grandmother, but also staff who are working in the home, all of whom are empowering her. All these women are empowering her to be the woman that she will be, in 10 years' time, give or take. I think there she's very, very lucky, is from where I'm sitting. But to come back to you and the idea of being a carer. Now, you also mentioned in the introduction that I read out that you are a single mother. And so you brought up your little girl from I don't know what age you are a single mother. Plus, of course, I appreciate that your mother is healthy now, but you have to be vigilant all the time. And that's really important. So this idea of being a carer, what does that even mean? What does that look like? Can we understand that?
Yeah, I think it's also different at different ages and stages. And often the carer might be suffering themselves. Somebody like me with a lifelong complex PTSD and several other difficulties. Have developed an autoimmune challenge as well. A lot of that is to do with trauma sitting in the body, right? And so there are many things that go into sort of being a carer. It's not your only identity, and it should never be that, right? We have to lead full lives. We have to be able to travel and embrace love and do all sorts of things that give us joy and peace and purpose, and not have a one-dimensional perception of the self or an obligation or duty that one might impose, as a sense of loyalty to a parent or whatever. So while care is important, and but boundaries are important too. And while the other person who is suffering is important, but it should never be by minimizing, altering or denying your own realities and truths and needs. So I think that's the first thing I would say, that a carer is not just a carer. They're also a person first, and they have their own life. But in terms of providing care, it is, and especially for long-term chronic conditions, it does take a toll, and it does need us to constantly recalibrate almost on a daily basis. As we speak right now, my mother is currently going through a mini relapse phase, if that's what you'd call it, which is basically where, perhaps the medicines in her are not adequate for the current chemical reactions. And currently she's slipping a little bit, and I'm working on the medication and helping to treat her. And so it's a live situation for me now. But there is still a sense of, like I mentioned, life goes on, and my daughter's just been on a high altitude trek, and I've just come off this Ayurvedic retreat, and remotely been managing my mother and my mother's care. And so, all of this, you gotta pick up the pieces, you gotta pick up the responsibilities, but also pick up your own needs simultaneously. It may not be a perfect balance every day. I have realized somewhere in the course of my life that a daily balance might be too much to expect of oneself, and it's a bit of a self-sabotage. It's almost like a way to then reprimand yourself. And I don't know. I mean, as an entrepreneur and as a mom, and I don't think I can manage a daily perfect balance. But I've realized once in every 3 days, 3 to 4 days, I want to feel like I'm generally doing okay. So there's a bit of a check-in, and to say that across all the different roles how am I feeling? How are they sitting in me, and how am I showing up in them? So I think that's sort of the check-in that I would encourage everyone to
I think
do, so that
that's very crucial, Neha, and I'm really appreciative of you saying that because all of us who are carers of parents, and many of us, certainly people of my age, if we're lucky enough to have a parent, inevitably, if you are living with them. I mean, at the moment, I live in London, as you know, but I'm visiting, and I'm in India, and I'm in where my mother lives, and my mother is almost 90, and of course, she's got somebody who's taking care of her. But when I am here, I see myself as the carer of my mother. I play Scrabble with her, I engage with her, I chat with her. Obviously, the lady who takes care of her will not be able to connect and engage with her the way I do. So I give a lot of myself, and I see my role when I am at home with my mother as spending good time for her, not about me, entirely about her. Which is totally fine, and I have no regrets, and I enjoy it very much, fortunately, because it's not a medical health issue at all. I'm not taking care of any illness of any kind, so I'm lucky. But when there are young people, younger children, I'm saying people of, I say younger, somebody my age, but with an elderly parent who is unwell, and who has to take care of that individual, we often forget that our physical well-being and our mental well-being is
Mhm.
important. And I know it's something that we've all heard, but it is a bit like the airplane advice that is given. Take care of yourself first before you put the oxygen mask on your child. That's the photograph they show. But in other words, before you put the oxygen mask on the person you're caring for. And first take care of yourself, because otherwise you don't have it within you to take care of the other individual. And that's important for us to all acknowledge and not
Yeah.
feel guilty if you
Yes.
go away for a week at Ayurveda, for example, which you've just done, and rested and recovered because you were unwell the last time we spoke, and you've come
That's true.
back a new Neha who will have so much more energy for her mother,
Yeah.
which is lovely.
And also for myself, but I think I'd like to push that one step further, Smita, and say that, often we say, okay, well, at the very least, all I need is to make sure that my mental health and physical health is preserved. But why would one aspire for that? Why would one aspire just for the bare minimum that one requires to survive and to exist? I think the question really, and the reset that we need to have. And a lot of these stories in our book, Homecoming, talk about each of these 11 women having arrived at that in some way or the other. The reset really is not just to say, what is the formula just about to survive and make it every day? But it's really that beyond the needs of yourself and your caregiver, what are the things that will actually help you thrive, that help you feel balanced, that will help you feel, you're not carrying a resentment, you're able to engage, but with lightness and love, but equally you're able to pull back, and invest your time and effort elsewhere if that gives you more joy. So I think investing in thrive, investing in joy, investing in peace, and not just the bare minimum is important. And often caregivers sort of feel like we're coming from burnout back there. If we can just about get to an even keel, then I think that's good. But I'd love to push the envelope a little bit more and say, actually,
I'm thank you for saying that, because I think most of us would have said, "Oh, good, we've come from burnout, we've stopped a bit, maybe we've had a hot bath, but that's not good enough. We've got to push the envelope a little bit more. We have to." And the three things you said was very much about what one's own joy, whatever joy gives us. For somebody, it could be lying in bed reading a book in the middle of the day and doing
absolutely.
nothing else. For someone else, it could be going for a long, brisk walk. It doesn't matter what it is, but what gives you that pleasure, what gives you that joy without thinking about anybody else for that period of time.
Yeah, I think there is an innate desire and a craving in each of us to be firstly who we truly, truly are, and to find that person and sort of give ourselves a chance to fall in love and accept and care for that person. And then to belong, to belong to a community and to a family and to a purpose and a cause. In fact, my chapter in the book Homecoming is called Being and Belonging, and I think these two words really are the essence of my learning journey and lifelong learning journey, because I think it's about nurturing these. It's not a child is born with these naturally, with the expectation to belong and the expectation to be taken care of, and to be, it's okay to be vulnerable because you're safe in the world. Also, you'll find out
But
eventually
are
when the
you?
child.
That's the question. Yes.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And a sense of being, and but that has to develop, and we lose that somewhere along the way. So the world, the society, the way it is, the expectations, the technology, everything is eroding and burning up that essence. And so to be able to then unpack that and say, actually, I'm going to go back to the basics of who I basically am. And a lot of us don't have sight of who that person is. We really don't know who we are.
So this
And
idea of belonging then, because the word belonging will mean different things to different people. What does it mean to you?
I think the first, the title Homecoming is also very tricky to, very, very sort of true and special to me, because it's about belonging to yourself also.
That's
So
what I
I think
thought you were going to
finding
say.
a finding a home and a seat within your own heart for yourself, and it sort of means that there is safety in the self, there is comfort in the self, there is the desire to nurture, and you're not running away. You can sit in your own skin and own your truth. And often we like to own the versions of ourselves that are either socially acceptable, or the versions that we have worked so hard to build up that we don't know how to walk back from. And so I think really the key really here is to know what is that truest authentic version, and as broken and tattered and damaged and glorious as it might be, then to just truly embrace that without being shy or embarrassed. Or so I think belonging is really that. But in addition, I think it's also about context and people and communities. I mean, human beings are social. So for me, it's very much about extended family. It's about friends. Oftentimes in my life, friends and their families have been my family, and so it's chosen family. And no norms there, all sorts of across genders and across contexts. And then I think spaces, being connected to the earth and being connected to the elements and being close to water and fire, and looking out up at the clouds with your feet on a wet grass. I think it's about all of that. A sense of nurturance for that self is gives you a sense of belonging. What it then does is it creates a safety to say, okay, I'm now safe, I belong, I'm home, and where could I go from here? And then suddenly the world feels limitless in terms of possibilities, and there's a curious exploration that unleashes. So I think that does not come actually without that sense of belonging, at least to yourself,
And I
if
think
not.
that's and I think that's lovely because I mean often the phrase that I use is be completely whole, be comfortable in your own skin, completely, totally comfortable in your own skin. And very much earlier on in the conversation, you made a point that sometimes you've let yourself down in terms of being comfortable in, my words, not yours, or belonging. And you've gone back to your old self. So what did that look like? Can you give us a story to give us the context of that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are always patterns that we carry within ourselves, because once we've had to navigate certain things, and a certain approach has worked, you might carry that. In my case, how I approach life and people and contexts and difficulties when I was a child, I continued that for a while, and then I realized that actually the approach is to embrace all problems and manage them and be front in line, first in line as the problem solver. So, even if there was a storm passing by in the distance, to throw yourself at it and become the hero of the day. And, strength, it's all about strength and resilience, and, this mighty force of doing, of protecting other people. And by that, finding relevance, finding a place in the world, being needed, etc. And so a lot of my early 20s was about that. And it really became sort of going way out of my way to accommodate people and their needs and their requirements, complete strangers perhaps, but with no sense of balance and no sense of self. And always keeping the focus on everybody else and really making it about that, and in a way almost minimizing myself and the need to see myself.
Whereas in the
I think
early
the
days, sort of 0 to 15, what you would
Yeah.
try and do, as you already told us, is just to remind us, because we're
Yeah.
hearing so many wonderful things from you now, and I appreciate it. But just to remind us that, 0 to 15, certainly, and probably a little longer too, you were running away from what was coming your way. In terms of, well, good things, you ended up being physically extremely, superb at sport and so many different things. Whether it's table tennis or basketball or volleyball or you name it, you're out there and you were becoming a champion at that. But you focused all your energies in something else just to avoid what you were facing on a daily basis. And now what you did is you completely turned things around with
Yeah.
reflection. And you said, because what happens, and I want all of us to appreciate what you're saying here, is that all of us have stories, right? Our narrative. It doesn't necessarily have to be as traumatic as yours. But whatever our
Mhm.
story is, it could be that, for example, I was in school and let's say I'm in school in London and I was bullied very badly by somebody from Turkey, a little kid in my class who is from
Mhm.
Turkey, and bullied very, very badly. And it is in my DNA and it's kept there to protect me and keep me safe because that's,
Mhm.
as we know from psychologists, we don't want to face that trauma. And so I never go to Turkey. I don't want to have anything to do with Turkey because of one personal experience. Whereas your life was much more dramatic than
That's
that.
right.
I mean, and sorry, I don't mean anything against Turkey. Turkey is a beautiful country, and I love the food. But you know what I'm saying? It's any example. Call it a Malayali who bullies Neha Kirpal in school,
Yeah.
and you don't want to have anything to do with Malayalis purely because of that one bullying experience. That is a norm. We
Yes.
do that to keep ourselves safe, and so we need to appreciate all of us that when something as big as this happens to a human being, whether it's Neha or anyone else who's listening, it's don't beat yourself up. It was
Yeah.
the safest way to be.
Yes.
And
And
then
I
the
think that
new Neha
commitment
was,
is important. Yeah.
yeah, and then the new Neha became extremely brave and courageous. And I have to applaud that because you went towards the storm. That's what you're saying.
And I think that was just phase two, because that's also not healthy. And I wanted to sort of also put in then a phase three and a phase four, because in
Please,
a way,
please.
you know, to say that, as children, because you don't have the tools and faculties, you just run away or you freeze, and people deal with childhood sexual abuse like that, any of the adverse childhood traumas. These are the responses that children give, and either you act out or you act in. And we're seeing these rising and younger suicide rates now in the world, and drugs and addictions and all sorts of things. And we say the problem is of loneliness, but actually the problem is of connection, and the lack of the connection with the self and the family. So I think that's the
Belonging.
early phase. And then this phase of throwing yourself and making it all about resilience. I mean, as someone who's sort of now, this is now my fifth entrepreneurial venture in a way in the last 2 decades, and each of them have been substantial in scale and stature. And I can say that, from my own experience, I realize that a lot of what the world celebrates are your successes and your strengths, but I think there's not enough credit and importance given by anybody to the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities and the difficulties. And actually, it's in those scars and the healing that real lasting recovery takes place, and the thrive can be achieved. So I think for me, phase three, which has sort of been the last, I don't know, 5, 7, 10 years, yeah, maybe 5 or 7 years, is has really been about trying to find that balance, saying, okay, how about I make space for myself in my own life, some of my needs, some of my wants, but also some of my desires, and what I'd like to be and do in the world. And I think that's when you take away this definition of human doing and start looking at the human being, and say that, okay, if I was not up to all these, seemingly very important, impactful things, who would I be, and how do I feel about that person?
Very good
Uh,
point.
you know and you realize that a lot of the stuff that you just sort of put in the cold storage in the basement of your home has got to be dealt with, otherwise it's rotting in you, and it gives you autoimmune and cancers and all sorts of things. And so I think the journey really for me then is to say, okay, can we take some of that out and start looking at it, and it's often a very hard process of going through that grief, and loss, even things like a lost childhood or a lost marriage or a lost opportunity, or the lost chance of being a certain way, or not living with pain. These are all losses that one needs to grieve. And then finding that balance. And often I used to say to some of my friends that actually my strength is my biggest weakness, because everybody sees you as strong, and so you're expected to be strong, and so therefore you fit that uh, sort of persona and present as strong, but it doesn't allow you to really be your whole vulnerable self. So I think this is the phase now, Smita, where I'm being adequately selfish, and also recognizing that it's not selfishness actually, but just self-love, and trying to find that balance. And then you sort of stop take on every aspect of your life and say, okay, let's look at all these choices and why I made them and what I would rather make. And if we give ourselves the permission to say, okay, every day we is the first day of the rest of our lives, and so the day we wake up, I mean, they say this in addiction all the time, the day you decide not to drink, maybe it's one day at a time. And then it all adds up. And so this is sort of my current phase 3. Let's see where it
But
takes
you
me and
you
where
you you say
phase
though
4
that you say that there is a phase four. I mean, I think you sound like you're in a pretty good place, but you clearly feel there's still more.
Yeah, I mean, I look forward to it because I can see that I think there could be a time and space in my life where, to a much greater extent, I'm able to try and be one person across all my contexts, where work uh, has meaning all the time, and there is a easy, seamless fluidity between sort of who one is and what one does and how one lives. And for that to be the case all the time would be sort of this ideal state for me. I mean, this kind of being which is feeling at peace and harmonized across contexts, I think is an aspiration. And so I see it, and I'm sort of inching towards it, and sometimes one step forward, two steps back. But I think it's something we should all aspire for, and it's something that's possible. I know, looking at my mother and my father and how they're reinventing themselves, blindly supporting this homecoming venture where I have, quite boldly put our entire family story out there. I think people change, and you can change at any stage the minute you give yourself permission to change and choose to. So I'm looking forward to whatever comes next.
Next phase four. I think we should pause there, Neha, because there are other questions in my head, but you have given us so much valuable life lessons. And I'm just wondering whether you could kind of take all this, the last 40 minutes or so of our conversation, and summarize for all of us listeners when we are faced with challenges where it may not be anything like your own personal story, but challenges are a given, you know, up and down, that is life. And when these things come our way, what can we do? Little things that we can do to help ourselves support ourselves. What's your
Yeah.
advice?
I think, I mean, I don't know if it's advice, but it's what seemed to have worked for me in hindsight, as I might say. And so it's not really something that I can profess or something I knew or can claim, but I think recognizing that, as I've shared some of my own anecdotes, there are no challenges that are too large to break our spirit. And just to recognize the power and potential and possibility of the human spirit, and to always have faith in that and lean in, I think, is a really important um, realization. And sitting with that, then to look at to look at the stuff that has made us who we are, both good and bad, and realize that actually one can go back 10, 20, 50 years and undo the effects and the repercussions of the challenges and free oneself
You can
from.
actually undo it. How would you do that?
I think it's just about witnessing it, isn't it? It's just about seeing it. It's about looking at little Neha and saying, I see your pain and I see your difficulty, and I can feel the terror of being all alone, but you're not alone anymore. And actually, you now have different tools and different understanding, and you have the wisdom of age, and you have some more experience that might make it easier. And so it's hand holding your own, little versions, I suppose, and making different choices and saying, okay, so then if I feel safe, I might show up in the world differently. I may not be exhibiting the same patterns. And often we say that, if we were abandoned as children or if we face neglect, we might pick partners or pick contexts or situations that reinforce some of those for us, because ultimately we pick what is familiar and not necessarily what is healthier. And until we don't undo this sort of trauma loop that we find ourselves in, it sometimes shows as self-sabotaging behavior, and it's subconscious. Our choices, and whether it's difficult marriages or difficult work context, if you were abused, you might pick another abusive context. So in a way, what was done, you tend to keep bringing that, inviting that almost into your world to reinforce that thought process and feeling, perhaps. But the freedom then is to say that if we could go back and actually just witness it, allow that story to be told, not as facts, but just felt as what was the felt experience, it sort of releases those emotions. At least that's my true feeling. It releases those emotions. You're not storing it as tension in your body anymore. It sort of makes you feel validated and seen and understood. And I think that's often enough, actually. And one can talk about therapy and medication and all sorts of things. And we do so much work in this space. And across my organizations, Amaha, I mean, we reach 600 cities. We work with 40,000 clients a month. But I think that long and short of it is that illness needs treatment and needs early intervention and treatment. But wellness, which belongs to all of us, mental health belongs to all of us, is something we can proactively invest in. And it's about just the path within, right? The mental, as we've said, the journey within, and the path to wholeness, and a little bit of the name of the book is also coming from there. So I think it's really about that. And if I was to say, besides sort of owning your vulnerability and sort of not necessarily playing along only your strengths, the courage is really in that act. And the sooner in life we allow ourselves to do that, I think it's very helpful. The other thing I would say is that our past definitely inform our future, and if we and therefore we have the opportunity, in a way, as the laws of the universe and secret, we have the opportunity to create it. And the only way to predict the future, there's that famous quote, right? The only way to predict the future is to create it. And there is that power. If we know who we are and where we're coming from, then you know a little bit more about where you want to go. And so I think
Wonderful.
being just more internally driven rather than being externally stimulated gives yourself a compass, and you just need to turn up that volume and maybe crank down some of the other
All the
noise,
other
that
stuff. Exactly.
surrounds us.
And
Yeah.
and before we end, Neha, for those of us who are in India, they can get your book, can't they? Can they get it through Amazon or bookshops? And what is the name of the book again? Could you tell us?
Yeah, the book is called Homecoming: Mental Health Journeys of Resilience, Healing, and Wholeness. And it's co-edited by myself and Dr. Nandini Murali. This is a story of 11 women leaders from different walks of life across urban India, philanthropists, psychiatrists, social entrepreneurs, who have come together and shared lifelong severe mental health journeys, but also their path to wholeness, in a way. And so, yes, it's very much available on Amazon. Lots of the key bookstores across cities starting to house it. It's just been a couple of weeks it's out, and soon will be out on Amazon globally as well.
Wonderful. So once Amazon globally take heed, have a look, make a note of the book. And I'm sure there'll be many people around the world, including India, who would want to learn and read and think about their own lives in the context of what they're reading. Neha Kirpal, thank you so very much for sharing your story seldom told.
Thank you. Thank you, Smita. It's been such a pleasure to have a deep, reflective conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in. This episode was edited by Alina Kazmi with production support from the 180 DC JMI team. The best praise is sharing, as you all know. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share. And of course, thank you for listening. I am Smita Tharoor, and this is Stories Seldom Told.